Hello, I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, two Jews on the news. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm all right, Yonit. You know, I'm okay. It's hot and sweaty in London a bit. It's a little bit muggy. And how are things where you are?
Well, same here, by the way. I mean, completely. I think it's a gazillion degrees outside in Tel Aviv. You're not missing anything right now, and definitely not missing the fact that the comeback kid no one ever missed, coronavirus, is back. I guess, well, you have to kind of disappear and then reappear to be the comeback kid. But it's back in Israel, for sure. How are things over there, by the way?
Well, it's here too. And there is a graph doing a lot of circulation here in which it shows the numbers of cases plummeting for our European neighbours and heading skyward for Britain, because coronavirus cases are very much back here through the so-called Delta variant. And everyone's just waiting on the edge of their seat to see what so far seems to be the case, which is, yes, these cases are back, but they are not leading to hospitalizations and deaths. But it does just lead that feeling that, you know, this is never really gone away, and maybe one day we're not going to be lucky, you know, that one day the virus will mutate in such a way that the vaccines cannot catch it, and that is a worry.
Yeah.
But the vaccine only has to get lucky once. It has to find one variant that gets through, and then it's pretty scary.
Yeah, that's some gloomy small talk on our part, I have to say. Yes,
this is our idea of cocktail chatter, you and me. Message to listener: do not invite Yonit and Jonathan to your parties, because they'll bring it right down.
Yeah, I mean, like we used to do this like after 10 minutes. Start talking about, and now it's like after 30 seconds, we just put the gloom on. No, I mean, here as well, you have the fact that 35% of the infected here are fully vaccinated, people who have been fully vaccinated. That's the downside of this Delta variant. In Israel, they have more than 100 cases a day and outbreaks in schools. But I think the upside is, as you said, we have not yet seen an uptick in mortality rates or in serious, severe cases, which might mean that thus far the vaccines are holding up. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the phrase everyone used to use was, we're going to have to learn to live with COVID. And, you know, it was a platitude. It didn't necessarily mean anything. But I think maybe now this is actually what it means. It means accepting that this thing is going to mutate. There are going to be variants. And in a way, accepting that and accepting that there will be infection rates going up and down. And as long as it doesn't lead to deaths, then you kind of maybe have to accept that.
Yeah, I mean, you had the Director General of the Ministry of Health here saying maybe what we're going to see is that you're going to have to take a shot every January, kind of like a flu shot. It's going to have the different variants, including this is what we're going to be living like, and that is okay. It's contained.
Yeah,
it means that
and when you say, you know, kind of like the flu shot, here the health officials here are saying actually really like the flu shot, as in you may take it with the flu shot, because the worry that, you know, it's almost like the Jewish mother needs something to worry about if there isn't something else. Now people are saying flu is going to be the thing to worry about, because everyone was hiding indoors and during lockdown, and therefore we didn't get flu and therefore didn't build up the immunity. So some officials are saying that's what we're going to have to worry about, is a big wave of flu, and maybe the remedy will be to double shot in the autumn and get covered for both. So we have that to look forward to.
Oh, yeah. And again, we always have something to worry about. So the news business will continue to flow, Jonathan.
Yeah, that doesn't run out.
Just putting that in parentheses. The one thing interesting here to note in Israel is how different the sort of rhetoric and style of the new prime minister, Naftali Bennett, still needs time to get used to that, in comparison with Netanyahu. Now, obviously, the numbers during the height of the pandemic were demonstrably higher, but you had Netanyahu with his rhetoric saying, we're on the Titanic, this is World War III, you know, in every sort of press conference, this was the imagery that he was presenting to the Israeli public. And now you have Bennett standing on the podium and saying something like, well, don't travel abroad if you don't have to, and don't, you know, have events indoors if you don't have to. It's kind of like, don't get COVID if you don't have to. You know, it's a kind of toning down of the rhetoric.
That could be really popular, actually. I mean, just the idea of somebody who is just a bit calmer, and where, you know, I hesitate to say Bibi Netanyahu was the most hyperbolic politician in the universe ever, because that's hyperbole. But the point about him was that he was always dialing up the rhetoric to 11, and maybe people will think, as my late mother used to say, it's a yontif when someone, you know, just is a bit different. It gives everyone a day off, and maybe people have been needing that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Look, I think his detractors, Netanyahu's detractors, would definitely say he would also use that as for political gain to kind of scare everyone. And definitely, it takes kind of time getting used to the fact that someone is talking differently about this. By the way, I don't know how many people know this outside of Israel, but Bennett really, his main criticism against Netanyahu was the coronavirus, his mishandling, what he saw as Netanyahu's mishandling the coronavirus. He even wrote a book called How to Beat COVID. It's more a essay, really, How to Beat COVID. And now he might be writing the sequel to that. But seriously, this is his big test, right? And we still don't know where this is going. As we said, we don't see a rise in hospitalizations, but in 2 weeks, this might be taking a different turn, and it will be Naftali Bennett's big test.
So what's the sequel? Is How to Beat COVID again?
And Bibi. I said how to beat Bibi. So that he might be working about at this. I mean, he was, this came out in the height of the pandemic. It's a 140-page book by Netanyahu. This was kind of ridiculed as, what are you doing here? Why are you trying to tell me how to run things? But he really sort of became this prominent voice during the pandemic, saying, Netanyahu isn't handling this correctly. And for him, if you met him and he spoke to you, he would say that is the moment where he realized that Netanyahu needs to be replaced.
Right. No, I think that's going to be one of his tests. But there are many tests for the new prime minister. And from this distance, I've been really fascinated to see how he's going to deal with, in some ways, the issue that defined his predecessor, among others, I suppose, but is Iran. And that is back in the news again, Yonit.
Oh, yes. Talk about another comeback topic that is back in the headlines. So Iran's nuclear ambitions, of course, the nuclear deal intended to curtail these ambitions. So we have the same problem, Jonathan, but different leaders. You have a new prime minister in Israel, a new-ish president in the United States, and of course, a new president in Iran, a new guard everywhere. Now, Iran itself elected on Friday, and I use the term elected loosely, as I said, a new president, Ebrahim Raisi, an extreme hardliner among hardliners, right, infamous for being one of the 4 judges who oversaw the torture and mass execution of 5,000 Iranians in the late 80s, including women and children. And then ever since climbing the nefarious ladder and becoming a protege of the supreme leader, Khamenei, to the extent that many people believe that he might actually be his successor as supreme leader. But again, the question here is, what does this mean for the Iran deal? I think both Washington and Jerusalem assess that he will move forward with this in any case. He will begin his tenure in August, so many people think that actually the United States is going to hurry and try and sign the deal before August.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny all this because it assumes that the change of Iranian president is a big deal, whereas in a way, because they did go from Ahmadinejad, some of us have less than fond memories of him, over to Rouhani, and he was billed as the reform guy, and in a way nothing really massively changes because the decisions are taken by the supreme leader, and as you said, it wasn't a kind of real election. All the other potential dissenting candidates found themselves mysteriously struck off the ballot paper, a technique that some politicians might...
That's actually truly rigged elections, if you want to look up what that means.
Memo to Bibi, next time, go Iranian and just strike a line through Bennett's name and Lapid's name. It may work out well for you. You never know. But anyway, my habit is now not so much to look at the change and just think it's the decision comes from the Revolutionary Guard and the president and the supreme leader at the top. Nevertheless, you're right. There is this change everywhere. And I suppose the interesting thing is that one bit of the dynamic is I always felt that when Obama was seeking this deal, he was really desperate and in a kind of hurry for it. He didn't have a legacy. It was 2015. The clock was running down on his presidency. Joe Biden is not in that kind of hurry. Mm-hmm. He's got some time and he's already got a big domestic achievement, the COVID support bill. He is not, chalishing for a deal. Here I am going again. I'm in some weird Yiddish thing at the moment. But
we encourage this.
I think it's the heat, actually. I think it's the heat that's doing it to me. Anyway, he's not desperate for the deal in the way that Biden was. And I think that might, in the way Obama was. And that may change the dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's true that especially Kerry was criticized for being overeager to get a deal, and that Biden is at least sort of sending out the message that he's not going to make a deal at all costs, right? I mean, he's not going for this in any way. I would also note that, again, there is a bit of a change of tone from the Israeli side. I mean, remember, Netanyahu never, at least in the last weeks of his tenure, never allowed his officials to go to Washington and talk about the JCPOA, the Iran deal. He would say, no way, don't talk about it. It's a bad deal. We don't want any part of it. So you had Yossi Cohen, the director of the Mossad, and Meir Ben-Shabbat, his national security advisor, in Washington, and they didn't talk about it. Now you have Aviv Kochavi, the head of the chief of staff of the IDF in Washington, saying the J word, talking about the JCPOA, and trying to maneuver this in a way. Obviously, Israel can only affect it in the margins, but sort of Naftali Bennett ramping up his engagement in this and saying, essentially, maybe we can still affect something. The longevity, saying that Americans say it should be built longer and stronger. So maybe in that regard, inspections, research, et cetera, we can change or make a little bit of a change here. Of course, he will be attacked ceaselessly by the head of opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, here in Israel, who's already been doing this. Let's hear a little bit of what he's been saying this week in English here.
Lapid promised Blinken that Israel would not surprise the United States on matters relating to Iran's nuclear program. I always reserve the right to act on our own without informing our American friends. And that's why this government is so dangerous to our future.
Really laying in to Naftali Bennett there, saying, this terrible, dangerous government.
And Lapid, yeah.
And Lapid as well. And, I think it's quite interesting that it wasn't quite the kind of Hollywood production values that we've been used to.
You notice that?
With Netanyahu's videos. This was a bit like a sort of amateur TikTok that your teenage kid may,
because the topic is urgent, up. Jonathan. It's urgent. We need to put it out.
But here's the thing about Bennett that I think is, to me is interesting, is let's say the engagement that you mentioned works in Washington and he somehow gets a deal that is better for Israel and worse for Iran, say. Do Israelis then accept that that's what happened and applaud Lapid and Bennett and say, you've got a better deal? Or do they automatically assume that this deal is, that if Bennett's accepting it, it's not because it's a better deal, it's because he's weaker than Netanyahu? Even if the deal is better, will Israelis think, well, we know, the one thing we know is Bibi said no, and the new guys are saying yes, they're a pushover?
Yeah, well, definitely Netanyahu and Netanyahu's legacy is to be very tough on this topic. I think the question is, what has that toughness achieved? Was it a good route for Israel to take? And when you look at 12 years ago, how close Iran was to the bomb, you look at it today, how different is it? And so that's a question. I'm sure that they will be, no matter what happens, they will be attacked by the opposition here and Benjamin Netanyahu, first and foremost, saying they're weak. That's for sure. How this plays out in Israel has a lot to do with the way it is contextualized. But I do want to make a note of the fact that Netanyahu, again, I think this is important. He didn't say this. He said this message that we heard now, the Lapid Bennett is dangerous for this country because of their the way they're treating the Iran deal and the U.S. He said it in English. He was sending a message not only to Israelis, he wasn't sending a message to the GOP, he was sending a message to the evangelicals, and he was sending a message to the U.S. in general. Guys, these people, they don't know what they're doing, and I'll be back very soon.
And this is where I think Bennett and Lapid and anybody is outgunned by Netanyahu, is just the juice on Capitol Hill that Netanyahu had. Like him or hate him, you just could not deny that he made himself, I don't mean Israel, he made himself such a political player in American politics, partly just through sheer longevity. I mean, people had long congressional careers, still didn't match Bibi's whole duration in American politics. And therefore, he just knew everybody and knew what buttons to press. Yeah. And
he doesn't have the same buttons. He didn't have the same buttons now as he did in 2015 when Congress was Republican and when he could pull off a speech in front of Congress.
100%. But Bennett and Lapid just don't have any of that. They just don't have the sort of familiarity, the first name terms, the long histories with, the junior congressman, the congressman from Indiana's, 3rd district. Netanyahu would know him, would know his district, etc. I mean, it's a tougher mountain for them to climb. But I think if people are looking in an unjaundiced way, the fact is it may be a better deal. And if that is a better deal, that could be notched up as a very early win for Bennett and Lapid. As I say, if they can persuade Israelis to believe them, rather than thinking they were somehow rolled by the new administration in Washington, D.C.
Again, the Trump effect was important here because if you're in the Middle East and you have someone behind you who seems volatile and unexpected and can do all kinds of things like taking down Qasem Soleimani, that is in some ways helpful to Israel. You have, again, a different administration, not only here. So that plays out differently.
Yeah, I like the so-called madman theory there. That was the technique that apparently Nixon was the originator of. He used to tell Kissinger, just tell them I'm crazy and I might do anything. And therefore, that would give extra leverage. And I think, Trump, and in a funny way, even Bibi had a little bit of that going for them, which is the idea that, you just don't know what they'll do. But certainly Trump had that. We should talk about the rest of the world a bit. Or when I say the rest of the world.
The rest of the world?
It's our classic.
What is that?
It's our classic maneuver. It's how the rest of the world still sees Israel. Don't worry. But it's two things happened in America this week that caught my eye. And I thought, I don't know if these are straws in the wind, if these are signs of what's coming, or if they're just they're both quite fringy things, to be honest. One, as you know, it's Pride Month, and we saw Yair Lapid ordering the Pride flag to be flown from the foreign ministry, I think, and, Israel often praising itself for being a kind of leader on gay rights issues, LGBTQ rights. But this week they have been shunned by the Chicago Dyke March, which is a big event in the LGBTQ calendar. And they've been shunned in the form of a sort of brand logo for the event, which shows a woman on top of what looks like a kind of armored vehicle, burning two flags, and one in each hand. One is the American flag and the other is the Israeli flag. And maybe in a way people would have thought, look, if they're against America, they're obviously a pretty radical group and therefore it's no big deal they're burning the Israeli flag. But this group has previous, as they say, because in 2017, the same march banned a few activists from carrying Jewish pride flags. These were rainbow-coloured flags with the Star of David in the middle. They were banned, in other words, from carrying a Jewish symbol. There was a big argument afterwards where the organisers said, no, we didn't want them because we thought they were Zionist symbols and they would have made people feel unsafe because they were too associated with Israel. I don't know. It's sort of quite a moment where even this was 4 years ago in 2017, but you can't carry a Jewish symbol. Now, the flag is shown burning. Admittedly, it's the flag of Israel. But that came together with the second thing, which is in Philadelphia, a food festival disinvited a food truck under the name Moshava, run by an Israeli citizen of the United States living in Philadelphia, who was selling food from his food truck. And again, because the name and the word was too associated with Israel, he was told he was unwelcome and booted out of the festival. There's been a huge row, and now the festival itself is cancelled. But I don't know. What do you think? Are these straws in the wind? Are these telling us something or not?
Well, I mean, can I be Israeli and blunt about this? Not like a product of American elementary school, but just outspoken and Middle Eastern about this for a minute?
Go for it.
Is that okay?
Be Israeli.
So, the Chicago March poster, I just want to say, burning American flags and Israeli flags, come back to planet Earth, people. I mean, you're very far in space. Just let the mother ship find you and take you back. And the food truck story is just so many mistakes. They took the food truck. The organizers of the event just took every wrong turn on this story. But I'm not sure, as you say, that these are just these small incidents. I think we're seeing something that is bigger here. And we've talked about this. We talked about the fact that the Gaza issue erupted in violence, not only in Europe, but in the United States. And we're seeing all these kinds of incidents. And I think that what we should be talking about is two things. One, there's something internal happening in the United States in the way that what happened in the Trump years, what I think you can say is the spiraling of the American political system, right? You saw the extreme right going out into the streets, feeling like they have the support trickling down from the top. And now, in that kind of equation, you're seeing the radical left coming out. There's never this sort of vacuum. It's kind of a response to this. And maybe people who thought a little bit, it's analogous to the fact that you thought maybe coronavirus will be over because we have vaccines. The effect of the Trump years on the American political system, with no relation to Israel, by the way, in this regard, it's still there. And it isn't ameliorated by that fact.
Yeah, and I think things have definitely radicalized. I mean, I suppose what sort of the nerve it strikes in me a little bit is, first of all, it's a kind of unthinking, reflexive exclusion, not just of Israel, which is what I think was going on with that flag, but of anything that is even slightly, wrongly associated with Israel. So they look askance at the pride flag, which was actually a Jewish symbol, and say, no, it's just within, it's within the same postal district as Israel, and therefore, no, we're not having it. And I think that was what was going on with the food truck. It's very tempting to say these things, they're out in outer space and it's irrelevant. Andrew Breitbart.
No, I didn't say it was irrelevant. I just thought it was radical. It was extremely. This is not the mainstream of the American thinking.
It's definitely not the mainstream. I agree with you. But Andrew Breitbart, of all people, that guy really who was Trump before Trump on the radical right, he always said that politics is downstream of culture. In other words, the shifts happen in the culture first, and then all formal politics feels them later. So even though these groups are quite fringy, and they're very fringy and radical and probably unrepresentative, it just makes you think, is this what is coming? And this idea that even as an association, as I say, even a mistaken association, may be enough that it leads to a kind of ostracism, and that would be a big shift in America. That's worrying,
but I think what we need to kind of look at here, and this does have to do with Israel, is not what's happening in the radical left. Let's look at the progressive left, and let's even look at the mainstream left. Israel has a problem there, right? It started before the Trump years, right? I think we mentioned this before. The March 3rd, 2015, Netanyahu speaking in front of Congress over the head of a Democratic American president that was, the American left thought that was, and the liberal Jewish community thought that was incredibly disrespectful. And then came the Trump years, and that fanned the flames because people felt like the equation between Trump and Netanyahu and Israel, and began to see Israel as a branch of the of the Republican Party and a branch of Trump. So there's a sentiment in the American left that we can't ignore, which is, and they're fiercely critical of Israel, not anti-Israel. We need to address that. And Lapid and Bennett need to address this. I'm saying more Lapid than Bennett because it's easier for a centrist to address it than it would be for a person who comes from the hard right. He needs to meet with these people. Lapid needs to talk to them. You need to talk to the people on the progressive left who are still Zionists. You need to talk to the AOCs. Talk to them. And when you have a prime minister in Israel who said he was for the annexation, that's still a problem in a sense for that community. But you can say most Israelis don't support this. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the fringe is one thing to deal with, but the mainstream is another problem, and it's a real problem.
I think it's a very good idea about dialogue, and I think Lapid, for the first time in a long time, is somebody you could imagine sending into that room without thinking, without looking at it through your fingers, terrified of what they're going to say wrong, which is how one has felt for best part of 2 decades in terms of Israeli government leaders. So Lapid, you could imagine, but I do wonder if he would really struggle to use the kind of language that would be persuasive even to the quite moderate American left now. Would he use a word like injustice? Would he use a word like inequality? I just don't know if he would be able to use the vocabulary that not just AOC, but actually some of the more moderates would need to hear an Israeli recognize. I think, in the old days, a Peres or, Shimon Peres was the best at it. He could come before an audience in Paris or London or New York, and he just knew to say the right things in terms of we desperately want peace, we want our children to live in harmony, and that would be enough. But I think now it's different vocabulary you need to use. The bar is set higher, and I just wonder if because of the domestic constraints that would pull Lapid back at home, he wouldn't be able to actually find it in himself to say what that group would need to hear.
I agree that I don't know, and I also don't know that they recognize this as a big problem. I think they think internally and outwardly that the problem has been solved because Bibi is no longer prime minister. Yeah. But it hasn't. It's still there, and it needs to be addressed.
No, there's more to be done. It was interesting that this is an absolute half glass. Is either half full or half empty, depending which way you look at it. The result in the New York mayoral race, I say result, we actually don't know. Yeah, you call it result.
What results, Jonathan?
We don't
do you know something we don't?
This makes Israeli elections look lightning speed. They've had this is the primary on the Democratic side to choose who will run in the November election. It's kind of assumed in New York City that once you've won the Democratic primary, the job is yours. They've tallied up, and the most moderate voice in the race, Eric Adams, came first, but they haven't yet added up the second preferences and third preferences because for the first time they're doing ranked voting. Here it takes 24 hours. But in London, that we'd use that exact rank choice system. But for some reason, New York hasn't quite got its head around it. And so it's going to take weeks. And so it's hard to read this election result, whether the left did well because the moderate candidate only got about 32% of the vote, or did the left do badly because the so-called moderate came first on first preferences. I don't know. It depends how you look at it.
Yeah, it sounds like you really want to go to New York, Jonathan.
I want to go anywhere.
You have a craving for New York. That's
yeah, it would be nice to go anywhere because, we are red listed and amber listed up to our eyeballs. There's very few places we are allowed to stray. So that's maybe why I'm looking lovingly across the Atlantic Ocean. Just imagining having a proper a political race to cover. That would be fun. We have awards to hand out, I think.
Always do.
We do. And so actually sticking with our theme of pride and unexpected decisions made there. I don't want people to think I'm obsessed with New York kosher delis. Talking A, of Halashing, and B, looking lovingly across the ocean, longingly. But once again, they seem to have made. The other day on this show, we were talking about how they had stamped as kosher a ham. This time they did something which may actually, for some followers of Orthodox Judaism in New York, be no less shocking, which is two New York kosher delis sent out pride messages to their customers on their database, and then hastily, or at least one of them, then hastily withdrew the messages. It's blaming that it was that their marketing company had made a mistake. But I think this is like a double chutzpah. It's kind of chutzpah for, the comedy of sending out and shocking, sending their customers into a fit of the conniptions as they suddenly got the rainbow flag in with their order of kreplach and chopped liver, and thinking, what the hell is this? And then immediately withdrawing the endorsement straight after. It's one of those sort of double chutzpah where you've managed to actually offend everyone all in one go.
Okay, I think we'll give that to you just for your sheer sticking with the New York kosher delis thing. But I have a nominee for chutzpah.
Okay.
Which really stands out. I think maybe calling it chutzpah is kind of minimizing it, but we'll put it here anyway. And this is the Britney Spears case against her father being heard in the U.S. court this week. This is kind of amazing what is coming out, like her father being in control of her. She's an adult. She's 39 years old. And not only her business, but all of her affairs. She testified. She said this was an abusive relationship, has been going on since 2008. He said he put her on lithium against her wishes. He doesn't allow her to marry her boyfriend, have another baby. Now, again, this is an adult woman, mother of two. We're in 2021. It's amazing. We have to explain why this is ludicrous, that he has this conservatorship over his daughter. And the comment from his lawyer was really just pure chutzpah. He said he's sorry to see his daughter suffering and in so much pain. Mr. Spears loves his daughter and he misses her very much.
Yeah, no,
this is just terrible.
It is. It's a terrible story. And I think people have also slightly sort of looking with some shame about how they used to follow, Britney Spears and her ordeals and trials and sort of not take them seriously, and now thinking, okay, they missed something there.
So mensch, you do mensch, I'll do my mensch. What do you?
Yes. So the mensch, I thought we could nominate Yana Vinarova, who will not be a name people recognize because she changed her name and grew up to become Janet Malcolm, journalist and writer for The New Yorker. Still writing for them not that long ago. She died in her 80s and really was a very important journalist. I know we you and I both actually often mention journalists on this show, but a Jewish refugee from Czechoslovakia in the 1930s, went on to become such a sort of singular voice in American journalism, wrote a lot for The New Yorker, and her particular thing was really to sort of reveal what journalists often do and the kind of complex, and she would say in some often dishonest relationship journalists have with their subjects and how they sort of lure them and deceive them into telling their stories and being like sort of seducers. She became a kind of conscience for a lot of journalists, I think, because she did expose in some ways the darker side of our craft. And I think she just was an important voice, and given where she came from and where she got to, somebody worthy of recognition this week.
And in the Freud Archives is just a perfect book. I'll just add into that. But yes, read her. She's incredibly interesting. Voice, my Mensch Award nominee, Jonathan, goes to my neighbor here in Tel Aviv, living pretty much across the road Quentin Tarantino, who,
I love that.
you know,
That is very, very cool. I mean, as name dropping goes, that is quite good, isn't it?
Yes, I don't do name dropping a lot, but I think if you want to drop a name, just make it big, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so yes,
good.
he's been living in Israel the past year. He's married to Daniela Pick. She's an Israeli model and a singer, and they have a son. And he was talking about studying and learning Hebrew with his toddler with the help of kids' programs on TV. This is what he told Jimmy Kimmel this week.
He watches these like baby TV kind of things, and it's all in Hebrew. And so I'm learning with him things like, you know, cat is katul, horse is sus, cow is para. All right, so I'm learning, you know, the Hebrew Sesame Street version.
It's a good way to do it.
Hebrew.
Yeah, okay, maybe he needs a little bit of Hebrew lessons from you as well, Jonathan. But just a request for Mr. Tarantino. I mean, you're a great director and all, but I do not want to see your version of Sesame Street. Okay? I don't want to see Quentin Tarantino takes on Sesame Street, everyone walking around with, samurai swords saying to kill a big bird. No. Just keep on making those films for grown-ups.
Don't even give him the idea. I don't like that. No, I look. Can I make a confession to you, Yonit? I am not.
Please.
I know that more admirable observers of the genre than me really admire him, more expert observers. For me, I've never really loved Quentin Tarantino.
No, when he's practically Jewish, when he's practically we got him on our side.
I know, and he's your near neighbor, and I'm sure you're knocking on his door, borrowing a cup of sugar,
throwing screenplays in there.
But I don't.
I dropped my screenplay. I'm sorry, Quentin.
You're gonna. It's they're a bit. I don't love the violence, and I find them just a little bit exploitative. And Inglourious Bastards, I thought, took a story and a heritage, and I think Django Unchained the same, that isn't really his to take, and just sort of exploits it for violence. That said, I've never felt more warmly towards him than I do having heard his Hebrew for Beginners experiment just then, which was very endearing. And so who knows, I may be won over. And look, the films are brilliantly made.
I have a more awkward confession than yours, Jonathan.
Oh, go on.
Which is I can't watch the violence in his films because I cannot deal with graphic violence. So I, somewhere very early along the line, Mr. Tarantino and I had to part ways. But people kept talking about his films. So I actually read his screenplays. So I've read Tarantino's films. They're very good on paper.
That is peak nerd, Yonit. You're already such a geek.
No, you cannot judge me for being a nerd. That's chutzpah.
That is chutzpah, but that is, from one geek to another, that is peak geek, which is like me. Actually, you've just said the same thing. I can't do violent films either, is the truth, and I don't like them, and so that's probably why I've had the allergy. But to then, because you want to keep up with everyone else, to read the script is fantastic.
Good. I'm just saying they're pretty good, and now I once heard Jamie Lee Curtis, by the way, on New Yorker radio, admitting that she can't stand horror movie films. The woman who started her career in horror, and she had to watch Silence of the Lambs, so she got the makeup artist to give her the complete lineup of the film, every place she has to close her eyes. I wish there was an app for that. So
that would be a good app. You could. You're in the land of the startup. Invent the wuss app for the cowards among us. That could be good, couldn't it? And you could call it wuss. And it could come with an extra feature where it automatically puts your fingers over your eyes, which you could save for when Israeli politicians go in to meet American politicians. So it could have a double use.
We're on to something.
I think we are on something. Yet again, we have come up with the next big thing. Remember, review us, give us 5 stars, tweet about us on Instagram. We are @2Jews, just letters, no numbers. Ping us, mention us, post, whatever it is people do on all the various social media platforms. Do that and recommend us to your friends.
And thank you to our executive producer, Lior Friedman, who suffers us every week without complaining, Rom Atik, head of podcasts, and Omer Primat and Irad Eshel for original music. I don't think you used enough Yiddish words this time, Jonathan, so please improve yourself. Till next time.
Okay, nächste Tag. I think I used plenty. It's very, very good being with you, Yonit. See you next time.